Hello there. Oh, excellent. The voice of God. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm trying to figure out what time zone I am in, and it is afternoon.
It's not that afternoon.
I'm sorry, it's what?
Just barely afternoon.
Barely afternoon. So thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the CTO panel. Unfortunately, we're one CTO shy of whatever the name of a collective of CTOs happens to be, because unfortunately, Ray O'Farrell, our corporate CTO, who was going to be here, he's unwell. And so I'm having to fill in for him a bunch of things, and he's unable to participate in this panel. But nonetheless, hopefully, well, not hopefully, definitely, we'll have some fun, and we'll talk about what's going on in the land of CTOs and technology at VMware. Format, probably going to spend about 5 minutes each talking about areas, what we do, areas of focus, kind of stuff that's happening in our various areas and domains. Then probably we have a few questions, canned ones. It'll be quite funny since we're slightly light. I will be asking questions of myself, which is quite a natural state of being for me. I have multiple personalities in here, and they quite often talk to each other, but I very rarely let them out in public. And then we'll open up the floor to the questions. I believe we have a couple of runners who will take microphones around later on. So this session, along with several others, with the CTO in the title, this is actually the first year where we've done essentially a track that is CTO office related. It's not for CTOs necessarily, although we welcome any CTOs who happen to come along in the audience, but it's really we want to have an opportunity to help our customers, our partners, and everyone at VMware and VMworld understand the role of the CTO, what we're doing, and to highlight some of the interesting work that's being done by our teams in things like high-performance computing and telco and things like that, and research and innovation. So thank you for joining us. Without further ado, I'll ask the panelists, each of them. There's Guido, who you saw hopefully on stage this morning, and Joe Bagley, who I think the world and his son, daughter, and everyone else knows. Each of us to introduce ourselves, and I will go last. And let's start with you, Guido.
Perfect. So my name is Guido Appenzeller. I'm the Chief Technology Strategy Officer for the Network and Security Business Unit. So we're building NSX, the network virtualization product. Currently, spending a fair amount of time thinking about how we're going to extend NSX. You saw some of that on stage this morning. You know, how we're working with third-party public clouds, how we're working with containers. You know, we're getting interested in SD-WAN. So lots of interesting things going on.
Very cool. Joe.
Yeah, I'm Joe Bagley. I'm the VP and CTO for EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, for those who don't know. My job has many different things in it. In one element, I'm a mini Paul, which is interesting and fun in many ways. But it's essentially my job is to connect with our customers and spend a lot of my time talking to our customers about their strategy and sharing our strategy with them. So at a very high level, usually CIOs, CTOs, a lot of press and analyst stuff, this kind of thing. But at the same time, I'm responsible for connecting R&D in the field. And I do that through a program that we have called the CTO Ambassadors, which is global, and I manage the EMEA part of that, and there's some CTO Ambassadors I know in the audience. And at the same time, I get involved directly in certain research projects. And so in the past, some that I've been involved with, you may have seen come out as products, are things like Evo Rail. And at the same time, things I'm working on right now are some of the projects around IoT and unikernels. So a lot of the container stuff was new stuff we've been talking about for a while, and one of the things I was involved in, and I've already moved on to the next thing, which is unikernels, and I've mentioned that a couple of times this conference, and it seems to have bubbled up. So lots of different things.
Very cool. And I guess by definition, that makes me the older, wiser superset of Joe without the facial hair. Is that it?
I just worry that my hair's ever going to grow that long in a few years' time.
So my role as CTO for the global field is running a set of programs that connect R&D with our customers, partners, and field, and helping people understand why VMware is building what it's building. How does it all fit together in the big picture? And also, not only creating the means by which we can share that, because all of our customers, when you buy into VMware, you don't just buy today's product. You have trust and faith in VMware that you're also buying into our future. And that's the role of CTOs, is to help define that future. So part of the programs that I run is about making sure everyone understands where we're going, why we're going there, how everything fits together as best we can. And also to really aggregate and pull back data and information from our customers, our partners in field, helping understand how people use and quite often abuse our products. It's amazing how much we learn and understand from how people use things in unintended ways that actually end up delivering enormous value. But it's how we aggregate all of that information and turn it back into R&D so that we build better products, we satisfy your needs, we fix the problems in the products that are there, we recognize that there are, because there always are, quite frankly, when you build products, they're never perfect. But also to gain insight. Insight, because innovation isn't always about solving the problems that you tell us that you have. It's about anticipating the problems you may not realize you have, and anticipating opportunities that you may not realize that technology actually gives you. So this morning, hopefully most of you will have seen Pat's presentation. So when we start to think about the future, that's a large part of my role in the business, is figuring out programs that support that and actually figuring out how we articulate a technical or technology strategy and vision for the company. Run a set of programs, the Ambassador program, there's some dotted around the team here, the room here, really about how we provide amplification for that message, but also how we gather data. If you see people, ambassadors are wearing black polo shirts with a gold kind of crest on their breast, which says CTO Ambassador. Go up to them, talk to them. The whole point, their role in the business is to make sure they're this great contact point with you, our customers, and partners. So that's me in a cocked hat, if you will. Do you want to spend a couple of minutes, telling the world what's happening, certainly, Guido, in the networking world, what you see happening in the next 3 to 5 years, what really excites you, and what are you thinking about?
Gaze in the crystal ball.
It's perilous by definition, but it's a lot of fun, and I think it's the fun part of our job. How we turn that into reality is the really hard work. But what does it look like from your perspective? What big shifts do you see coming down the pike?
And so networking is undergoing huge changes at the moment. And let me just first do a quick inventory of all the things that are in transition, and then what that will mean for I think, VMware and NSX in the future, right? Networking for the longest time has been a vertically integrated industry. What this means is you buy from one vendor, a chip, software, and a system, say, everything from Cisco. That's very different from how you purchase servers, right? If you buy a server, today, the chip comes from maybe Intel, the server comes from Dell, right? And on top of it, you have, Microsoft or Linux.
Why did you say Dell?
Yeah, just picking a random example.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very different type of purchase, right? For servers, right? It would be crazy to say I can only use HP with Linux, and if I ever want to switch to Windows, I throw away the server and buy a new one, right? But for networking, that's still the norm, right? I buy a switch, and it comes with iOS on it, like Cisco's iOS. If I ever want to put Arista's operating system on it, that doesn't work. I need completely new hardware. And if you actually look inside these switches, the hardware is absolutely identical, right? Today, they're typically using Broadcom chips. They have probably 80+% market share on the data center. So what's slowly happening is that basically the networking, the model how networking is being sold changes to the same model how servers are sold. So that basically the software and the hardware are coming apart, right? And NSX is just a manifestation of that, right? We're basically taking software that used to run inside a switch, and now we're moving it into the hypervisor. And suddenly we can virtualize the network, we can do all these great things, right? So that's the first thing that's changing. I think that the second big thing that's changing is that the definition of networking, or what it means to do networking, what the hard part is about networking, is really different today from what it used to be, right? Networking used to be about getting packets from A to B, right? Inside your data center. I have one server, I have another server. If I have, fast transport of IP packets, as a networker, it's mission accomplished. Today, that part is actually very easy, right? All the complexity in networking comes in through who should be able to talk to whom? What kind of firewalls should be in between? What kind of services do we insert? What about quality of service? So basically all the intelligence that really sits on top of the transport, right? And then the third thing that's really changing is that the endpoints we see are changing, right? It used to be just servers in the data center and then virtual machines in the data center. Maybe you had a little intranet, for your desktops. And now suddenly you have bring your own device with AirWatch. you have VDI, we have the Internet of Things, right? We have customers moving workloads into public clouds. We have VMs, but we also have containers, and sometimes we have containers inside of VMs, right? So the number of different types of endpoints that we need to support with networking is exploding, right? So what this means for NSX is that we're really going down a path where in the future, it's going to be much more about providing connectivity between these very heterogeneous types of endpoints, right? Some of them will be classical VMs, some of them will be managed through somebody like AirWatch, some might be Amazon, so we have nothing to do with them. We basically just have to place an agent there. But our goal long term is to provide connectivity between all of these, and that'll keep us busy, I think, for many years to execute on that vision.
Cool. Joe?
So for me, my real interest is you listen to someone like Guido talking about networking, and because I'm looking across everything, my thinking is much more around what's known as secondary effects. So what's a secondary effect of an innovative action? So if you think about, and that's the really hard stuff to predict. So the example that's always used when you talk about secondary effects is we could predict the car, kind of, right? You could predict that coming, but you couldn't predict Walmart. And Walmart success and model is a direct result of people having cars. So when you looked at the car, you wouldn't go, oh, well, now there's going to be a bunch of Walmarts. Like, that just wouldn't happen. So for me, it's looking at things like that, looking at other technologies around and trying to work out what the secondary effects are going to be on the market, because that's then where we're looking to move and make innovation and guide and lead the way. And when you start doing that, you realize actually a lot of the barriers we come up against, it came up in the last session. I invented a thing about an hour ago called Bagley's Law, right?
Uh-oh.
So you've got Godwin's Law, which is that any argument on the internet will eventually reduce to someone mentioning the Nazis. And so the Bagley's Law is that any argument about enterprise IT will eventually go from technology to being an argument about people and process. And it tends to be that. Every conversation I'm having now, we start off with a technology conversation about this, that, and whatever. Virtualized networking, it's the future, it's definitely the way to do it. And why aren't you doing it? Oh, because of people and process. It just seems to be that barrier. So for me, I'm interested in the secondary effects of the technology that we're deploying from a people and process perspective, and then in turn how that's going to affect the evolution of our technology and so on in this sort of snowball effect. And it comes down to a fundamental balance that I'm seeing between two things. It's really simple, actually, is that you get two types of org. There's the org that looks at a new piece of technology and goes, okay, how can I kind of ram that into my existing people and process, which is where you fail. Or there's people that go, oh, there's a new technology. How can I evolve and, change my existing people and processes to take advantage of that technology? So that's really where a lot of what goes on in my head, and sat there on the many long flights that I take of thinking about what happens in this world is very much sits in that area.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's funny. If I look at my career, I started my life as a coder, building distributed systems somewhere around, I guess, the best part of 30 plus years ago. And I've come on my own personal journey that, the past kind of helps me in terms of thinking about where my trajectory is in the future. And I've become really obsessed with technology, but now I've become very interested in not just the evolution of that technology and secondary effects. I don't know whether they're tertiary effects, but I'm really interested in the impact of where technology intersects with business and where it intersects with life. Because we're seeing so many fundamental shifts in this space. Sometimes tying it back to VMware seems difficult, but actually, if you saw Pat on stage this morning, I think it's fairly actionable. I think we're lucky enough through both timing and some brilliant ideas on the part of some engineers and some great execution to be highly relevant and to have been key to making this whole cloud thing happen. I mean, what we're seeing, in Guido's space in terms of NSX is the whole SDDC thing is actually monumentally simple in principle, right? You separate applications from infrastructure, whether that's storage, compute, or networking. Once you separate applications from infrastructure, you can do really interesting things with them. And it turns out it's not just a case of moving them around the data center, but as you have finer-grained components of applications and services, you get to move them around the network. You get to move functionality to the edge. You get to move it backwards and forwards. And if we look actually at the technology trends that got us to where we are today, you can really think in terms of the application that has gone from monolithic through client-server 3-tier to highly distributed and disaggregated and very, very fine-grained, where the problems move away from testing and building to governance and policy and API management. And infrastructure has moved away from siloed resources to a fabric. And that fabric extends all the way out to the edge, to these Internet of Things. And we've seen these applications move backwards and forwards through time. And I had a slide, actually, that I have of this that I've used for the last 15 years. I look behind me because it isn't there, but I'm in the habit of looking behind me for slides. But it's interesting. What's happened is the trends seem to be continuous, but where we are on the trajectory shifts and changes. So understanding what that trajectory looks like, and then its impact on business, because once you get to this model of decoupling apps from infrastructure, you get choices about where you put them, on your premises, on someone else's premises. You get choices as to how you source them. And we end up in a space when we hide it with software.
Well, that's what excited me about joining VMware. So 4.5 years ago, I was going through the recruitment process of VMware, where I have the record for the largest number of interviews, which was 23.
We worked him hard.
I was being recruited by Paul at the time. And
we weren't quite sure, is that the...
Yeah, no, well, it was one of those things, but I flew to Palo Alto, and I sat down with, Steve Herod, for example, and we had a conversation for about an hour, and then it was like, oh, you must meet, and then they'd bring in some more people, and it just went on and on. But what excited me most was one, just some amazingly intelligent people that I was going to get to work with if I got this job. But more importantly, it really struck out to me that back then, this is 4.5, 5 years ago, VMware had amassed a collection of distributed systems specialists, including Paul and other people. And Paul won't, admit this much, but you come from an organization where they originally said the network is the computer, right? But back then, we didn't have the technology to make the network the computer. And I think if you look at what VMware's done in terms of the strategic leadership and what goes on in that thought leadership piece and how we build stuff in the office of the CTO, it is all distributed systems people, which is what excited me. And then your history with the OGF and other things as well meant that I truly believe that we were going to finally be part of that organization that was going to build the network as the computer and build that distributed system. And I think that's where we've come and it's where we're going to.
I think that's what I liked this morning about Martin. He didn't do the network as the computer, we did the application as the computer.
Well, I think that's it.
And it's that resonance between apps and infrastructure and how they've actually evolved together. If you think about it, 30 years ago, we had monolithic apps on monolithic servers. We got cheap microprocessors on the desktop, so we put apps there. Then we got the corporate LAN. It's like, oh, we could share files and printing and databases. We've got client server. Then we discovered we couldn't manage the goddamn client, and it was like, oh, there's internet-based computing, and it's stateless. And now we've got a client, and you've got your smart device, more power than went up in the first space shuttle, more or less. Mm-hmm. And it's got accelerometers, GPS. It's a thing. It's not a computer. It's got a whole bunch of things in it. And so now we have a very, very different environment. And the opportunities that presents, one of the things that Pat was talking about that I think is very exciting, he talked a little bit about software-defined decision-making, but I think there is the fact that everything is so connected.
Yeah.
Right? That is the...
There was an article I was reading last night about, it was about, crowdsourced weather. And there's Weather Underground and stuff like that. But it's the fact that now it's been pointed out that most of the smartphones you have in your pockets actually have a barometer in them. They have a pressure sensor. So now we have this massive potential mesh network of barometers. This instrumentation is being pushed out everywhere. So you start looking at this as a consumption device. Now they start becoming supply devices. So it really does start becoming, and then you're having to architect for that as a distributed system as well, which gets to be really interesting from a networking perspective as well as everything else. It all has to come together. So I think what you're looking at, and that's again what excited me from the distributed systems perspective, is you're not looking at, oh, it's a network problem, we're going to do stuff with network. Oh, it's a storage problem. Oh, it's a this problem. It very much is a interconnected fabric of different systems and things and components. And for me, that brings on a new breed of architect and architecture. And that's what excites me about what we're doing now, because the potential that, virtualized networking opens up. I always talk about the fact that, well, why on earth are we not got now, if VMs are now independent and independently secure and can be on any piece of hardware anywhere, why don't we just hand over where they're located entirely to some automated policy-based system, which is what we're doing, and suddenly you've got VMs co-locating because they talk to each other, but only for a couple of hours, and then they go back again, or whatever. That's how it should be, because why should humans be involved in that? It should be quicker, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So how do you see, if you look at the Internet of Things and the things at the edge, these days they don't have much power. Some of them, some people are talking about putting they're devices that are in the joists of buildings, and they are essentially powered by the Wi-Fi that's run in the building.
Strain gauges.
They're designed to be sitting there in the joists of buildings for 60 years, right? This is pretty impressive stuff. I mean, how are we going to secure those things? What does that look like?
It's kind of interesting. I mean, the Internet of Things, it's definitely here. You know, I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm sort of a geek. So my house currently has 38 IP addresses. You know, so it's door locks, it's the garage door opener, it's the pool controls, it's the music system, which is all IP.
It's all micro-segmented,
Smart TVs. It's not running NSX yet. We'll have to fix that one. But it's the amount of connections coming out of my house at any given time is probably in the high tens, right? And it's you look at the traffic, it's really amazing. And my prediction is that'll be the future pretty much everywhere, right? I mean, it gets so ridiculously cheap to add internet connectivity into a device, right? And it gets cheaper and cheaper to, on the other side, the data center to terminate that connection and grab that data. That it'll be ubiquitous. Like every car will be always on in the internet, right? Your bathroom scale will connect to the internet. It'll be.
Bathroom scales are connected. They're Wi-Fi.
Mine too, right? So I think there's there's huge opportunities there, right? It'll require better management inside your house, right? Because there's some systems which are more critical, right? If your kids watch Netflix, like a video streaming service, and as a result you can't change the temperature on your thermostat anymore, that isn't good, right?
Well, yeah. So I had that. So I have drop cam at home. I have a few of them around.
Yeah.
And
they need bandwidth.
So I get a statement every quarter from my broadband provider, and I literally was like, oh my God, when I saw the last one. 90 days, 1.8 terabytes of data was downloaded to my house. That's 20 gig a day. And I've got 2 kids that stream a lot of media. But what I was then interested in, what's the upload? And I'm trying to get that data now, so I'm now putting some stuff in to see what's uploading, because I'm sure that those things are going to be using data upload as well. So it's interesting to me that it's again moving from a world that's pulling to also pushing.
We're expecting multiple zettabytes a year. Zettabyte is pretty big, come from IoT.
Sounds like a lot.
It's a lot, I think. Someone told me, a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and it's probably out of date already, that 10 exabytes was something like an Amazon data center in terms of power consumption and space. Could be wrong, right? But we're looking at scale-out storage, all attached to servers in these kind of hyper-converted kind of infrastructure. And it's taking up this vast amount of space. So as you go through IoT land, we have these vast amounts of data. I mean, those are the challenges that when we think of the systems that we have to build. So the one cloud, any app, any device sounds glib in some sense, but if we look at it as a kind of manifesto about what we're about, the one cloud, I think, is very much around a single operational model, and I think as technologists we expect a convergence through time. The same way today, most people don't talk intranets and extranets anymore. There's the network, right? There's the web. Yeah. And the boundary between them is a logical one that you create, and I think the notion of these clouds as being separate and distinct, they'll be united by a common set of protocols and a common operational model eventually through time. And we want all the apps also to be able to run on our platform. That's not just your traditional systems of record or systems of engagement. I mean, I kind of think of it in terms of things of systems of intimacy. Engagement definitely feels like, the mobile cloud big data world, but once you add IoT into it, you know everything. I happen to be diabetic. It'll have all my stuff from my insulin pump and my blood glucometer.
It'll have his weight, right? It'll have his weight.
It'll have his weight, shared with the world if he's really unlucky and they're not using microsegmentation.
I'm scared someone's going to hack in and look at mine.
But all of this stuff is going to be incredibly connected, large amounts of data. And what we're seeing, and Pat mentioned a thing called software-defined decision-making. So if you think about how you make decisions today, what happens is you have an idea, you decide to do something, you act, you do it, and then you measure the outcome, right? And you go around this kind of control loop. And big data and analytics and real-time streaming analytics about figuring out, well, did I get the outcome I expected? And go around the loop. But what we see now is that there's a virtual version of that loop, and it's called simulation. Think about, if you want to test cars, you want to crash them. What did we used to do? We used to build expensive prototypes. It would take you weeks or months to build each prototype and iterate. It would take years to get the right combination of design and safety. And then there was like, can we simulate a car crash? Which was about, I guess, 15 years ago, 10 years ago maybe. Then it's, do I need to crash cars anymore? Probably not. And now it's how many simulations do I run to have the safest car on the road. It's all about, you can do it all in software before you build the real physical one that you then test and validate that your algorithm was correct. We have partners who now do this for things like supply chain management. They will do what if on a whole bunch of SAP.
Yeah.
And then figure out what's the adjustment to supply chain which yields the greatest benefit with the lowest risk, rather than spending forever going around that cycle and juggling with things.
That was one of the cool things about NSX, though, I really thought. When we first looked at NSX, it was the fact that because of the whole network model is in software, theoretically I can copy and paste that to somewhere else and then make some changes and see what happens.
Yeah.
You try copying and pasting your existing physical network to somewhere else and changing it and seeing what happens, you just can't do that. So it
requires people with a screwdriver.
Yeah, well, it requires an awful lot of cache as well, right? To actually have an entire copy of all the equipment that you've got in your network. Yeah. So, that starts to open up even more possibilities. But all of that has to be done in the concept that we're building this operating system for data centers, I suppose. That, that all this has to be done in software.
I think it's a very good point, right? I mean, what we've done at VMware over the last years is essentially we've taken what used to be physical infrastructure, whether it's servers or storage or load balancers, firewalls, routers, switches. We create the virtual equivalents. And yeah, as you said, right, I mean, we have customers today that basically snapshot their network and copy it to a second site, right? And before that was impossible.
Yeah, well, DR becomes really cool, right? Because you don't have to have matched equipment. Is it time we took some questions from the
floor? I was thinking of asking another one, actually.
Oh, go on.
So what do you think, what's the most exciting thing you've seen a customer do, Joe? I mean, you see them every day. What cool stuff have they done with our technology that...
I'll tell you, my favorite at the moment is one that happened recently, literally in September. Sainsbury's in the UK. Those of you from the UK will know, those of you who don't, massive retailer. It's the orange one.
No brand advertising. Oh, too
yeah, right. They still charge you 5p for a carrier bag. Now, the interesting thing there is John Ruddu, who's the CIO, that was the Chief Digital Officer, which essentially is CIO there now, which tells you something else, came from their web business. He actually came from Ocado, moved in to build up the web business, which was the leading sort of web delivery, grocery delivery. So they don't have stores, they just do grocery delivery in the UK. He then moved over to be the Chief Digital Officer at Sainsbury's to build out their web info, literally their web infrastructure. And then he's now been given the whole show. And the funny thing is, he's given the whole show. I know him for years, and he phoned me up and he went, I own a whole bunch of data centers. For some reason, I'm now going to have to become a specialist in air conditioning. What's that all about? Which was interesting, but a separate conversation. But what we did was he said, okay, I want to throw a digital culture at this business. And it was like, how do you throw a digital culture at a business that's as old and staid as Sainsbury's? And so they did, and what we came up with, I said, one of the things we should do is a hackathon. And he's like, oh, okay, I can do a hackathon. I said, no, I don't think you quite understand how to do a hackathon. Let's talk this through the way that VMware does them, and we do them internally. We've done them for years. They're called borathons, but for a reason that's nothing to do with them being boring.
It was the code name for the branch of software.
Yeah, Bora. Yeah.
But there you go.
So to get to the point of this, what made it exciting for me was he said, okay, fine, well, I'll go and get my development team and I'll tell them we're doing a hackathon. And this is where I blew his mind in a way. I said, no. Put up a poster in every single store you've got, in the room where all the staff hang out. Because right now, somewhere in a store in Essex, there's a guy stacking shelves who's a Grails developer, but stacks shelves on the weekends because he's a student. And what they did was they did this hackathon. We went in and provided vCloud Air, we provided Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and there were guys there, there was a 54-year-old guy who works in the warehouse in Essex, no kidding, who happened to be a Grails developer who turned up to come and take part in this thing. And the one that got me was every single member of the board turned up during that hackathon to see the people doing it, which showed how it's changing an organization. And the stuff that came out of that, again, this is how you change it. So again, I was one of the guest judges, and they had other people, including John. And so, they come and present their final thing. And they present their, here's a little mobile app, and you could see the traditional IT leaders that were sat next to me asking IT type questions. And my question to them was, when can you ship this? And you could see the team go, well, Monday? And this is a Friday, right? And you can see the IT people, what? I'm like, yeah, you should be asking those kind of questions. That's how you digitize a business. So to me, that's an exciting thing. It's a people and process thing. It's Bagley's Law again, right? But it's a people and process thing. It's how do you change an entire organization to take advantage of that? The fact it was on vCloud Air and Pivotal Cloud Foundry was almost irrelevant in that activity. Yeah. It enabled it, but it was how we've changed them to be a different culture. So now you've got an organization where they go, instead of sitting and whining about something that's broken in the staff room, in a storeroom in Scotland, they go, okay, well now I'm going to submit that to the next hackathon as my idea for stuff to be fixed. And there's, and now the IT department is now thinking in a far more agile way. We're talking about how do we change them to deliver stuff differently. They want to build an on-premises private cloud and integrate that with an off-premises private cloud. They are all over Cloud Foundry like you wouldn't believe because they never realized it could do that for them, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to kind of have this big forcing function, I think, to do that. So that's one of the most exciting things that's happened recently for me.
It's interesting when you bring up the innovation thing and, NSX, you guys are moving really, really fast. You do a lot in open source. Is there anything, how are you driving the pace of change there?
I almost feel that customers are driving us. I think in most cases, the new ideas for where we want to move the business and what we want to do, we're getting from customers. We're getting from you guys, right? I'm talking to customers about half of my time, and I'm always blown away what people are doing with our products that we didn't anticipate. Right? We had in VMworld in San Francisco, we showed containers, for the first time, and so I had heard about a couple of customers actually using containers with NSX, and I called one of them up. It was eBay, and asked them, so you're running containers, how many containers are you running? And the answer is like, well, we're not really sure. Probably a couple of thousand or 10,000 virtual machines worth of containers. You're like, well, wait, hold on, right? This is a pretty large. Containers you have a high density, so this is like 10,000 containers, 100,000 containers, and what he later shared on stage with the audience was he was talking that one of his primary use cases is that he uses NSX to prevent internal IP exhaustion. So they're running a /8 network, and they're running out of IP addresses because they have too many containers. And you're like, Jesus Christ, I had no idea. It's like this is massive.
10 dots not enough.
Yeah, it was funny when I was there. They were meant to have transitioned to IPv6, but I think they did externally, but not internally.
Yeah. So it's really amazing to see, and this thing really fuels our development, right? So we're looking at these things, and we're seeing something. One customer saying, "Oh, this is great. Can we productize that?" And then you talk to other customers. Is this interesting, right? That's how the most interesting ideas come up usually.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I listen to this, innovation is at the core of what we do as CTOs and the CTO office at VMware.
In fact, it's what you own. So.
And I owned it for a while. Yes, it was my distinct pleasure to own innovation at VMware, which is interesting because the notion of owning innovation is like having. I worry about it. I think it was Bill Joy who said, I can't remember whether he coined it, that innovation happens. It just tends to happen somewhere else. Because it's a law of numbers thing. And then the question is, how do you bias your organization to take advantage of the law of numbers? So one of the things is, our innovation programs inside VMware is really, your example is the classic one, is the idea can happen anywhere. And so what you want to do is create a system whereby no one is shy to come forward with their ideas. That's number one, right? You want then to have a mechanism for surfacing and identifying them. We have a social platform that allows us to do that as well as a set of programs. And then you want to be able to put the right idea at the right time in the right place with the right people to allow it to become everything it can be. And that idea could be something like a really incremental change to a product. It could be a slightly out-of-band thing. I'm hoping many of you here have played with flings, for example. The purpose of flings is to put those ideas out there in a fairly lightweight way. Some of the flings are incredibly useful, by the way, and are quite often previews for technology. And we have heavier weight programs as well. So we want to really bias it in any way possible that we can to come up with ideas.
Well, one thing you skipped over there, which I know is big to you, is that we have to be able to tolerate failure in that.
So failure,
People will not come forward if they feel that failure will be penalized.
So the thing about failure, so I have this maxim that failure is the currency with which you acquire knowledge. I don't believe that people acquire knowledge through success the first time. You have to learn how not to screw up. And the art is in how do you not screw up in a way that is expensive and damaging for your business. And part of that is research organizations. Part of that is that's what cloud is all about. So the reason, when Pat's talking about where we're going and why understanding cloud is so fundamental is that cloud has created a way of acquiring technology as essentially a commodity with no friction in terms of access. Yes, you pay for it, but you can do it with a credit card. You don't have to buy a $300 million data center, which is the last one I was involved in building. And that's quite a lot of money, $300 million, and you've got several of them. And if you're a big cloud provider, you have lots of those. And that's friction, right? If you get rid of that friction, that means your competition can come from anywhere, and they can come up with ideas. And those ideas are the things that undermine the business models that Pat was talking about. And so for me, that's very profound. But the innovation side is a big deal for us.
Yeah.
We're often asked, how we do it, and people think, oh, VMware, you're kind of getting staid and old. But actually,
culture.
I don't think so. The culture really is about driving ideas internally. We encourage absolutely everyone. We have a relatively unique thing called radio, which is basically we run our own academic conference inside the company, where a few years ago, every single engineer was invited. Now it's about, I guess, a third or a quarter of all of our developers and engineers, and we have a 1-week offsite where we have papers submitted, we bring people in the field to make our ambassadors typically come in to make sure we're connected with what our customers care about, not just highfalutin ideas that are off somewhere in the stratosphere, but to keep us grounded and figure out what's relevant and to get feedback. And many products that you will be familiar with have actually come through
Very much through
radio papers and things like that. So as an organization, we spend a vast amount of time, but it was very decentralized. It's about enabling the whole company to drive innovation and change.
I was interviewed yesterday they're doing this strange thing on the VMware stand, which you go and have a look, where various people are being interviewed in front of about 5 people that can be bothered to stop and listen. And by Ellie, who's our marketing director, and he asked me a question: what's your motto for life? And I said, oh Christ, I haven't got a motto. Who's got a motto? You got a motto? But then I was suddenly reminded that something that actually kind of does run through is that when I was a kid, my father was like this, and he's that kind of guy. That if you injured yourself, and usually as a kid you go to your father or your mother and you're like, boo hoo hoo, I've fallen over, please give me some sympathy and give me a hug. I didn't get that from my dad, not because he's not a nice person, but because he'd turn around and go, what did you learn? And you'd be like, well, so far I've learned not to ride a bicycle with no shoes, because it hurts when you fall off. And so I sort of took that up into when I became an adult, and with my children it's the same sort of thing. When they come to you and they've injured themselves, there's an element of, okay, what did you learn from that? And it suddenly dawned on me that actually, and this is literally in the thing yesterday, it dawned on me that's kind of like a VMware cultural thing and the toleration of failure thing. It's like when someone comes to you and says, this is broken, it's not working, I'm pissed off or whatever it is, it's kind of like, okay, well, what did you learn from that? What have we learned from that, and how can we move forward, as opposed to, oh, you're an idiot, I'm going to fire you. Because you can't fire your children, much as sometimes I've wanted to. You can't. So you go through this education process.
It's usually very expensive, Joe, if you go.
Well, yeah, it is. And I think in organizations, I think we sometimes take the easier option, which is to not ask the tough questions, not learn what you did, and just push them aside. Yeah. And I think that to me is a massive cultural difference that makes it fun and exciting still to work at VMware, because you can have that attitude, right?
So we've had a jolly good ramble.
A long ramble, yeah.
And I think what we'd like to do now is open up to questions from the floor. So I think we have 2 people with microphones around the room. Feel free to ask us the easy questions, but also feel free to ask us the hard ones that I'm sure
we've got one guy
are lurking around in your heads, and we'll do our best to answer them. We may not be able to answer all of them, but fire away.
My name is Frank from Germany. Thanks for the interesting talk. It was very good. Paul, 2 years ago during TEM Day, you shared your vision or view on the software-defined data center. Basically, it was automate like crazy, storage network, blah, 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 and then you did the transformation and you're there. The last 2 days, I saw a lot of bridges. So, though I understand the hybrid unified cloud, and I share that, it still feels like we're stuck with legacy for a little bit. So we're not getting rid of it as fast as you suggested or kicked me off 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I wonder, what's your view today?
So Joe can also share his feedback and Guido as well. I think setting expectations is hard. I think what we see is that it varies massively by customer as to how fast people are going through the journey. A lot of the technology already exists. We look at NSX, we're separating the app successfully from the network today. And our leading edge customers, and leading does come with some bleeding, there is some risk associated with it. And some customers, I was at eBay for 5 years. And the reason they will take risks that many of you will not, for example, is their business gives them no choice. So for example, we virtualized databases at eBay in 2000 because they scaled bigger than any computer. Had the world's largest Oracle SGA. And so they had to go and solve a problem because their business wouldn't exist if they didn't solve the problem. So there are some customers who are driven to using this new technology. For other customers, it varies wildly, based ultimately upon business drivers, the culture, the processes, and the needs of the business. So some will take advantage of building the whole SDDC. They'll try and do it really quickly. But at the end of the day, what I'll come back to is that it's not driven by the desire to get the technology out there. It's not a build it and they will come. It has to be driven by clear business needs, clear projects, clear outcomes. And those tend to drive aspects of the technology, not building the whole thing. I don't know whether it really answers your question. But the thing is, everyone's trajectory is different. There's a slightly different destination. Everyone has a different starting point.
If we talk more specifically about the SDDC vision, many people have seen me, I lay it out as this operating system for data centers, and I see it as one layer. Sorry?
It's a meta operating.
Meta operating,
meta
whatever.
is better.
So I don't care. Operating system for data centers, right? So a layer that stretches across multiple physical data centers and multiple clouds is the next extension of that. And you drop a workload on top of that, much like you run an app on an operating system today, and where that then ends up and where it goes is entirely a function of the operating system, not a function of what you do. Now, if you look at how we're getting there, well, compute, we're there, right? I can do long-distance transatlantic vMotion, right? So I can do that. NSX has freed us up to the point where the network is no longer a limiting factor in workloads freely moving around. It's all done in software now. Storage is still our problem, right? So if you look at vSAN, we're up to metro clustering at 5 milliseconds, which is not quite enough to transatlantic, that's for sure, but it's certainly for metro clustering. So, once we've got through that problem, which I think will involve us breaking the speed of light, which, we're okay with maybe trying that.
That's serious innovation, folks.
Yeah, it's serious innovation for you.
We're going to use tachyons as our means of transport, aren't we?
But when you get to that kind of thing, so the technology, we're so close there. I think there's a couple of bits we're missing, to be honest. We're missing the meta policy engine and the meta tagging process that goes through that. And we have these discussions a lot.
Yeah, so I think we've made enormous progress. I think the destination remains some way off in terms of the full thing. It has to be, because NSX is still relatively early in terms of adoption. The adoption curve, by the way, is much steeper than ESX ever was.
Oh, Christ. Yeah.
Right? Really, because all of you have become so used to virtualization that you're happy to take a bet on. So the interesting thing from my perspective as a systems guy, when I look at separating from network, compute, and storage, is that I definitely view it as a meta operating system. The job is to map workload onto resources in line with policy. Traditional OSs do processes and threads onto CPU, memory, and I/O. Our world is cloud applications and services onto virtual infrastructure, wherever that happens to sit, outside and everything else. For me, it starts looking like a really interesting version of an SMP computer. What was the whole point of the SMP is that you didn't care which processor your work or thread was running on. It looked the same. Your access times to data were the same. Every processor looked the same. The network looked consistent from wherever you were. As we build this out for the SDDC, we've separated from compute. So you don't care what's underneath you. It's x86. You present a VM that has a certain number of processors, irrespective of whether you have more or less underneath it. It doesn't matter, right? Once you separate the network is functionally equivalent no matter where you are. It looks the same. The thing that isn't the same wherever you are today is latency. So it's less about storage. It's more about data, is the way I would think of it. And today that is solved by the programmers and application architects who put the caching tiers and everything else in at the PaaS layer. My sense is actually that is the interesting area for the platform, because actually I think we have to do that under the covers. Yeah. Because developers don't want to care about that kind of stuff. And so we've still got some stuff to do to basically create the system where developers really don't have to care about where anything is or how they manage availability, or that has to be done for them. To come back to my now newly invented law, that most of our customers are still so far behind in people and process, they're not ready to consume what we've got for them today.
to be honest with you. So in quite a lot of ways, we have the systems that are available today. They're still, I love being able to go into a customer and they sort of go, can you do this yet? And I'm like, well, by the time you're ready to consume that, yes. That tends to be the answer with a lot of customers. Not all. There's always the bleeding edge guys. There's always the edge cases, and they're the fun ones. And we have a lot of fun with them. As a group of CTOs, right? But by far the majority are kind of not quite there yet in terms of whether they're ready to consume this. And I think
we'll
that's
get
important.
we'll get you there.
But we'll be there.
Sorry if I set the expectation we'd be done next week. I think we have other questions.
By Christmas.
We really should. Whilst we love talking, we should.
Just a question.
Sorry, can you wait till you have the mic on?
Is it?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. You talked a lot about day minus one. So a lot of innovation. Yeah. You're moving from very hardware to software defined. So everything is much more on a software level. But I'm interested in your sort of thought process, which is I'm worried about day one and day two. There is a lot of, what's the focus from VMware side on, a lot of discussion happens about API first and able to be integrated all the technologies and things which you are building. I'm currently seeing, at least feeling that from a focus point of view, that's not is actually going on, because there is a lot of technologies are getting built which are great in isolation, so NSX and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to day one, when I'm implementing that, where I require more an API driven, or day two, where I want to manage it better, what's the focus from your side?
So, to paraphrase you, I think, why the hell doesn't all the stuff just work out of the box?
And then how do you
perhaps? So, for us, there is a significant investment.
Sorry, can I ask a clarifying question? Were you more interested in sort of the operational aspects in terms of day-to-day management once the software is deployed, or automating that via APIs and integrating with other services?
I think you said both. Both.
Okay, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to fix that by Christmas, definitely.
So, whilst that is a wonderful answer, Joe.
I didn't say which Christmas.
That is true. He didn't say which Christmas. So we recognize this challenge. I mean, it hurts a number of our customers. It also hurts us. The place we want to get to, and by the way, what we're competing with when we start thinking about cloud is stuff just works. There's no installation required. Getting stuff to work together in the cloud is still challenging, but nonetheless, it's easier. So we certainly have to fix the installation thing. From our perspective, part of what the CTO manages and owns inside VMware is all our architectural processes around how we pull all this stuff together. And Ray, although he couldn't be here, is not just our CTO, he's our Chief Development Officer. And part of what he owns is creating the sets of processes in the culture that drive all of that sharing and making sure all of our products work together appropriately. So building the processes and the ways of doing things. What you see outside sometimes is an artifact of how we've grown as a company. Many of the products have come in through acquisition, so inevitably they will have different information models, different APIs, different nouns and verbs, if you will, of how they view the universe. That shouldn't be your problem. And so there are significant efforts inside VMware in a number of areas, one of which is to fix the problem of installation. As I say, with cloud, you don't even have to worry about installation in general, right?
Yeah.
Our goal is the stuff should just install itself. That's what we have to do. Now, there are some things where you can't just do everything. You need to know something about the environment around you in order to behave like and everything else. But our goal is to make, and we're investing a significant amount of time and effort in making installation very, very simple.
Can I just throw in one more thing here? Just to give you an idea of some of the complexities here, right? I think there's just low-hanging fruit where we need to do a better job in terms of integration, right? We're working on this. There's a program in place. Ray would be the perfect person to talk about it. There's a couple of other areas, actually, where it's a little more complicated. For example, with NSX, right? Why aren't we better integrated with vCenter and vSphere? What we have to keep in mind is that NSX also works with OpenStack environments, and KVM OpenStack environments, right? And it's very hard to find a set of management paradigms that feels absolutely native for OpenStack and at the same time feels absolutely native for vSphere, right? So as we get broader, actually, I think we'll have to redefine a little bit what our common denominators are.
And I think what you find as well is that through time, as the industry matures, what happens is that everyone wants interoperability and everything to just work together from the get-go. And the truth is that doesn't happen because each of the vendors has differentiated value in what they deliver and what they expose through their APIs. Eventually, as the market settles through time and technologies become more mature, you will find us settling on common sets of APIs and things like that. So we've seen that with OpenStack, and we expose that from our products as well.
So
that's the way the market has gone.
There is a program, there was a blog post posted up by Christoph Deccanini on the CTO blog about 2 weeks ago on the VAPI initiative that we've got at VMware and some of the standardization we've got going across the products there and SDKs that go with that, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see over the next year or so, more and more of that will be released and announced, and more of our products will be exposed under a standard common API in that way. At the same time, from an installation simplicity standpoint, I think Evo Rail should be held up as a poster child here because the Evo Rail project, we literally had to take that team away from everyone else that had anything to do with UIs and UX and go, okay, go and do this separately and don't let anyone say no to you. In fact, just don't tell anyone what you're doing and pop out at the end with something really awesome and cool. And then with that, we can then show the rest of the people in R&D that that's possible. And this is good, and that's actually exactly what's happening now. So you look at something like Evo Rail, you get an idea, but there's also a massive focus on ease of use and ease of deployment. And so Evo SDDC is a really good example of that. The Evo SDDC team probably is the team that I've seen work closest with our CTO ambassadors than anyone else, in terms of working with the field and also working with our customers to make sure that when we got to market, this product was as obvious and as simple and as easy to use as possible. And we'll continue to do that. Now, of course, as our portfolio gets more diverse, more complex, many more different options as a customer for you to click in and snap in, by virtue our management story, which at the moment is vRealize and the vRealize stack, and I'm not just talking vRealize automation, it's vRealize all the pieces in there, ops and orchestrator and everything else. All of that you'll see will evolve, hopefully, to be more simplistic. But then at the same time, I've now got people in the previous session going, well, can we have container management in there? Can we have this in there? Can we have that in there? How do you do application management? All that kind of stuff. So it's got to move.
On the application stuff, I mean, in the cloud native space, very specifically, we were leading the charge on application definitions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because ultimately all of this isn't about driving stuff up from the bottom, actually. It's about driving stuff from the top down, because everything you're doing is about managing applications. You may or may not realize it, but you're doing it by proxy. If you're managing a container, you're managing a VM, you're effectively managing the thing that happens to be inside it, which is an application. And inside a virtual network, it's your distributed application too. And that's the focus for us. And so as a CTO team, the way we're structured inside the company is there's a few of us in the office of the CTO, and then we have CTOs for the business units and out in the field to make sure as a community we're well connected across our products. But the initiatives that we're driving right now are very much in those space. Simplicity of use, we have recruited and are continuing to invest significantly in user experience. I don't mean UI. How do we get you to a place where you need the minimum set of actions to get something done, whatever that task is? It's not about making it pretty, it's about making it stupidly simple.
Yeah.
So we're investing a lot of time in that. We're investing a lot of time around the architecture that allows us to integrate the stuff. As I said, our competition is not, I would argue, any product. Our competition is a user experience that cloud has made real. Stuff just works. It's instantly provisioned, it's self-service.
Yeah.
Very little skill required to get stuff up and running and for you to be able to consume value. And our job as a business is to enable you to do that with our products, irrespective of whether they're on or off prem.
Yeah. We've got time for one more.
Was there another question?
One more question? Julian's got one down here. Oh, God, here we go.
Just talking about the cloud-native applications. Obviously, VMware, historically being a very infrastructure-focused company, this huge, big sea change happening very quickly for DevOps and cloud-native applications, where developers don't really know VMware and, in fact, probably lump VMware in the my IT team is rubbish basket.
Yep.
In the future, talking about lots of things with Photon platform, but you don't need HA, you don't need DRS, all those kind of things. Are customers going to be wanting to spend money with VMware in the cloud-native space, or are there just too many other exciting, interesting options without the infrastructure baggage?
Okay, can I give this a shot here? So let's first of all break this down to a couple of things, right? If you look at platform as a service, right, the way it's deployed in the enterprise now is that it typically sits on top of infrastructure, right, as a service, right? So you have, if you run containers, right now you probably want a hypervisor underneath, right? And at least in the enterprise, you don't run it directly on bare metal, because otherwise, you know, somebody hacks the container, they can escalate, you know, to root privileges, they can take over the system, they can sniff the network, they can, you know, insert themselves in the BIOS, and really bad things can happen. In fact, the trend that I'm seeing in Silicon Valley in the leading container companies is that they're at least toying with the idea to move towards hardware-based separation, so using hypervisors to separate containers, right? So the second piece is that, let me actually finish this thought. So I think what this means long-term is that we'll see hypervisors under containers, with every container running in a VM, right? And this is really what Photon Stack is targeted at, right? So this new ecosystem where you have a different way of packaging your apps. The unit of your app is very different, right? You want your app to spin up very quickly, if it's written as a proper scale-out app, you know, where it can just kill parts of it and restart them, right? You need much less functionality in the hypervisor, but you still want a hypervisor there. It's just a different one. That's where Photon Engine is coming from, right? The second thing is that all the services around that are actually fairly similar. For example, do you still want to manage a network for containers? Probably, right? You know, if a container behaves strangely, do you want to put that in a quarantine network, plug into a honeypot and see what happens? That's really not any different from a like normal virtual machine today. So I think a lot of the other pieces around storage, around networking, around operations, they'll be pretty much the same in a platform as a service world as well.
It's very interesting. I mean, obviously we think long and hard about these things. In my experience, there's a set of things going on here, even beyond the technology aspect of things. Now, most applications are actually hybrid. And I don't mean just on and off-prem. I mean, they're usually a combination of old style and new style. If you have a transactional system, you know, although the truth is the stuff that you need ACID consistency with is a very small amount of what you have, that is still going to be part of these applications and services that you build. They're not all going to be just the scale-out components. And the business is going to want to manage all of these apps and services. When I think about the bifurcation of new and old apps, actually, I don't think it's anywhere near that clear. So people, you know, you build something new today, it'll be DevOps or whatever, because you'll want to iterate it fast. At some point, it's non-differentiating. And guess what? You'll bung it over the wall to the guys in IT who have to manage it. So this isn't really clear. What my expectation is that people and technology organizations want simplicity in terms of how they manage the application lifecycle. They want simplicity both for their legacy applications and services, and they want simplicity for their new apps and services. And there isn't just bifurcation. There is a life cycle of the application in terms of when it's new and being rapidly developed to when it becomes older. And that's where we believe our value is in managing it for the enterprise. Because yes, the developer have their own Maslow's pyramid, right? There's functional differentiation. Don't care about anything else. Oh, I better make it perform. Yeah. Oh, shoot, I've got a lot of users. I better make it scale. Oh, my business depends on it. Now I worry about availability. Oh, shoot, regulatory compliance. I better worry about security. And then there's the manageability aspect that percolates up. And by then, they're already building version 5.0 down the line or something. But someone has to care about all of those things in an enterprise. A consumer-grade developer may not have to care about
So you know, just we've got 30 seconds left. And I think to your point, should developers care about VMware? Probably not, because developers care about the APIs and the services they can get. IT should care about VMware being able to help them provide those services to the developers. And that's entirely what our Docker strategy is about. So if you look at at the moment, IT's got some people going, I want a Docker API, and the IT's going, what the hell's a Docker API? I don't know. And now we're saying, okay, well now you can give your developers a Docker API. You still get the systems that you know to manage, secure, and everything else underneath that. The developers see a Docker API like they saw before, which is exactly Kit's demo on stage yesterday. But you as an IT organization maintain the control, scalability, and all the other kind of stuff you had before. Now, does the developer need to know it's a VMware underneath that? No. Do they need to know that they're getting what they want from the people they want in a way that's not going to get them into trouble? Yes, and that's exactly what we're doing. And I think that's pretty much it.
So let the developer sit at the top of their Maslow's pyramid, and IT, technology, take care of the rest.
Yeah, cool. I think we're totally out of time. The lady at the back
Thank you very, very much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and hope you enjoy the rest of VMworld.
Cool. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.